I've tried to forget that night for more than 30 years. God knows I've prayed for it. But some things don't stay buried. Not in a town like Miller's Ridge, where the mountains remember more than the people do. If you're hearing this, it's because I'm finally done carrying it alone. I was sheriff back then, 42, tired, and convinced I had already seen the worst a man could see. Death, accidents, violence, fires. Life in these hills isn't gentle. But all of that felt ordinary compared to what was waiting for me inside Blackwash Mine. Funny thing about the night it started. It wasn't special. No thunder, no lightning. Just cold air settling across the pines and a fog that rolled down the mountains like a slow, pale avalanche. I was finishing paperwork in my office, one lamp on, the rest of the building dark. The kind of quiet that eats at you. You start to hear every tick of the clock like a nail being hammered into something unseen. Then the radio cracked to life. It wasn't dispatch. It was a civilian channel, full of static and panic, a young man's voice breaking like glass. "Sheriff, please, anybody. We need help, near Blackwash." I grabbed the receiver. "Identify yourself." Danny Rutger. We can't find them. They ran into the mine." "Sheriff, they're gone." We heard screaming. The fog outside pressed against my windows like a living thing. "Which mine entrance?" I asked. "The north one, by the old conveyor tower." I felt my chest tighten. Of all the places, Blackwash Mine hadn't been operational since '68. A cave-in killed 9 men, including the foreman, and the company shut it down within the week. People said it was unstable, cursed, haunted, pick your poison. But teenage kids didn't care about history. They cared about dares and flashlights and the thrill of scaring each other. "Stay where you are," I told him. "I'm on my way." As I drove out of town, the fog thickened until the world narrowed to 2 white beams reaching through nothing. The forest looked warped, like the pines were leaning toward the road, watching me pass. The air smelled of wet earth and something metallic, the way old tools smell when they've been left out in the rain. I rolled down the window to clear the condensation and felt how bitterly cold the wind had turned. It knifed right through my jacket. Autumn nights aren't usually that cold. Not unless something's pulling the heat out of the air. 15 minutes later, I turned onto the mining road. My tires crunched over gravel and dead branches. The fog here wasn't drifting. It was standing, dense and white, as if it had been poured into the trees. The headlights struggled to cut through it. When I killed the engine, the silence rushed in. Not just quiet, silent star. No birds, no wind, not even the ticking of cooling metal from my cruiser. Like the whole mountain was holding its breath. Danny and 2 other boys stood huddled near the collapsed conveyor tower, their flashlights trembling in their hands. Their breath came out in quick little clouds. "Where are the others?" I asked. Danny swallowed. "They ran inside. We dared them to go in 30 feet. Just 30. But then we heard something, like rocks moving, but not like a slide or anything. More like," he paused, shaking, "like something walking." The other boys stared at the ground, pale and sick with guilt. I took my flashlight and walked toward the mine entrance. The fog parted reluctantly, dragging along the ground like a wounded animal. The wooden support beams were rotted, blackened by decades of rain and dust. The mouth of the tunnel yawned open, a gaping wound in the mountain. The air coming from inside was colder than the night outside, sharp, damp, carrying the smell of wet stone and rust. Then I aimed my light downward. That was the first time I saw them. Footprints. Massive footprints, each one nearly twice the size of my boot, pressed deep into the mud and phosphate dust. 5 clear toes, wide and human-like, but elongated. The stride was long, heavy, deliberate. I crouched and touched the edge of one. The ground was still soft, as if whatever made them had passed through minutes before I arrived. I felt the moisture. I felt the cold. Danny saw my expression. What made those?" I didn't answer him, mostly because I didn't know, but also because some part of me already feared the truth. I'd grown up hearing stories. Everybody in these mountains heard them. Tales the old miners passed down over cigars and cheap whiskey. Men talked about shadows moving in the lower shafts, about seeing shapes hunched over in the dark. Too tall, too broad, too quiet to be human. The miners gave it many names, but the one that survived the longest was the Ridgeback, a mountain spirit, a wild man, a creature older than the mines themselves. I never believed those stories, but crouching there, my fingers in the fresh imprint of something enormous, belief wasn't optional anymore. "Get back to town," I told the boys. "All of you." Danny hesitated. "Sheriff, our friends. I'll find them." My voice came out steady, but inside something was unraveling. I felt a weight I couldn't name pressing between my shoulder blades. The mine breathed cold air past my legs like it was sighing, or whispering. I radioed my deputy, Mark Collins. "I need you at Blackwash. Bring extra lights, ropes, masks, and don't come alone." He responded instantly. "On my way." While I waited, I shined my light deeper into the tunnel. The beam seemed swallowed, eaten alive by the dark. I stepped back, suddenly aware of how close I was standing to the void. The minutes stretched long. No crickets, no owls, just the distant drip of water and my own pulse in my ears. Mark finally arrived with 2 volunteer search and rescue guys. He looked at the entrance, then at me. "You sure the kids are inside?" I showed him the footprints. He froze. "Jesus," he whispered. "That's a joke, right? Someone's messing around with molds or—" I shook my head. He didn't ask again. We geared up, checked radios, tested the flashlights. The moment we stepped past the threshold, a sheet of cold air rolled over us like a warning. Inside, the mine felt alive. Every footstep echoed too loudly. Every breath smelled like wet limestone, rust, and something organic. Something that reminded me faintly of an animal den. Mark muttered, "I hate this place already." The fog thinned inside, but the darkness was thicker, almost physical. Our lights carved thin yellow tunnels through the black, illuminating flecks of dust floating like drifting ash. Around 30 feet in, I saw something glinting on the ground. A phone, cracked, trampled, still warm from a hand that dropped it. Next to it, a smear of mud that didn't look like mud. "Blood?" Mark asked. "Maybe, but it was darker, thicker, almost tar-like." I pocketed the phone. That's when we heard it. Farther down the tunnel, deep enough to feel instead of hear. A single, heavy footstep. Then another. Then nothing. Mark looked at me, eyes wide behind his helmet. "We're not alone." He didn't have to say it out loud. I already felt it. The mine seemed to vibrate faintly, like the mountain itself was shifting in its sleep. I took the lead. Every step forward felt like a step away from the world I understood. And as we went deeper, I kept thinking about those old miner stories. About the things they swore they'd seen moving where no man should have been able to move. But those were just stories. Just rumors. Weren't they? I didn't have the answer yet, but I was about to learn more than I ever wanted to. And God help me, I wish I'd turned back. The deeper we stepped into Blackwash Mine, the more the air seemed to thicken, colder, denser, carrying a metallic taste that clung to the back of my throat. Our flashlights cut narrow paths through the dark, but everything outside those beams felt alive, shifting, waiting. It had been decades since the mine was sealed, but it smelled as if the last shift of miners had walked out only hours ago. Rust, damp stone, the sour sting of old explosives, and the faintest undertone of rot. Not the fresh kind. The deep, settled rot that sinks into earth and refuses to leave. Mark walked behind me, his boots crunching through loose rock. The sound echoed in long, unnatural waves, bouncing off unseen chambers. Sometimes the echo returned too quickly, like something closer was repeating the sound back to us. I tried not to notice. 100 feet in, the walls changed. The smooth blasting cuts gave way to jagged stone and collapsed support beams. Our lights brushed over twisted rails from the older carts, half buried under decades of dust. Every inch of the place screamed abandonment, yet the ground held fresh disturbances, soft depressions, scattered pebbles, marks that didn't belong to time or weather. We found the first helmet near an old ventilation shaft. It lay on its side, covered in a gray coat of dust so thick it could have been there since '68. But beside it were 3 fresh scratches in the stone floor, long, deep, curved, as if something with claws had dragged its hand or foot across it. Mark ran his glove over the gouges. "This wasn't made by any tool," he muttered. "No," I whispered. "It wasn't." We pressed forward. The tunnel narrowed, forcing us into single file. The air grew colder still. My breath fogged in front of me, a pale cloud that drifted slowly toward the deeper dark. There was no breeze, no air current. Yet the fog moved anyway. Mark noticed. "You feel that? Draft shouldn't be coming from inside." He was right. Minds breathe outward, not inward. Whatever was pulling the air into the dark, it wasn't natural. 20 more steps and the murals appeared. At first, I thought they were old mine markings, symbols, tallies, maybe graffiti from board workers. But when I raised my flashlight, the truth sank into my stomach like a stone. These weren't miners' markings. The walls were carved with scenes, primitive, jagged, almost frantic. Humanoid shapes towering over smaller ones. Men holding tools. Something large crouched in a tunnel. A handprint, massive, pressed deeply into the rock. And beneath it, tiny human stick figures drawn like worshippers or sacrifices. Mark exhaled softly. These weren't here when the mine was active. My uncle worked the lower shafts. He would have told us. I nodded. These are new. Fresh scratches flaked off under my touch, meaning the carvings were days, maybe hours old. We moved slowly, our lights scanning the walls. The carvings shifted in theme the farther we walked. First showing miners, then miners running, then miners hiding. The last section of wall was the most disturbing. A depiction of something huge standing over a prone figure, arms outstretched like a guardian or a hunter or perhaps, worst of all, something claiming ownership. I didn't say it out loud, but I recognized the general shape. Broad shoulders, long arms, sloping head, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever name people gave it. But the carvings didn't present it as a monster. They presented it as a resident, a native of the dark. Mark lowered his voice. "Sheriff, the kids didn't make these." "I know. What about the miners? Could this been some kind of—" "No human hands carved this," I said before I could stop myself, because now I could see the grooves more clearly. Too wide, too deep, too uneven, as if made by fingers bulging with strength no man possessed. Mark swallowed. Then what did? Something shifted in the dark behind us. We both froze. Not the settling of rocks. Not the scuttle of rodents. A footstep. Heavy, slow, deliberate, followed by another. Then silence. Mark turned, sweeping his light behind us. The beam dissolved into blackness. I forced myself to breathe evenly. "Keep moving," I said quietly. "Whatever's back there, we're between it and the exit. If it wanted us, it would have taken us already." I didn't believe that. I just needed him steady. We walked deeper still. The walls widened into a larger chamber, the old blasting hub, where miners stored their equipment. Our lights revealed rusted oxygen tanks, collapsed wooden crates, and abandoned drill heads. A single, twisted ladder led upward into a ventilation shaft long since blocked by rubble. It was in that chamber that we found the first sign of the missing teenagers. A jacket, torn, one sleeve ripped completely off. A smear of dark, half-dried blood trailing across the floor toward a tunnel to the right. One that had never been part of the original mine map. "Sheriff," Mark whispered, "this isn't on the records." "No," I muttered. "It isn't." The air drifting from the new tunnel was different. Colder, metallic, and carrying a faint chemical tang that didn't belong in a mine. Sterilizer, disinfectant, laboratory air. My pulse quickened. "I don't like this," Mark whispered. "Neither do I said. But the kids went that way. We stepped into the unmarked tunnel. Instantly, the temperature dropped again. My knuckles ached from cold inside my gloves. The sound of our breathing seemed amplified here, bouncing off the walls in jittery echoes that didn't match our rhythm. Halfway down the tunnel, something skittered across the floor. Mark jumped. My light caught it, a flashlight. Not ours. One of the teenagers. Its lens was cracked, but the battery still flickered faintly, sending a weak, dying pulse across the stones. I bent down beside it. The ground around the flashlight was disturbed. Drag marks, deep grooves, mixed footprints, and something else. Something round, like the impression of a knee, elbow, something crawling or crouching. But the center of the disturbance was unmistakable. A barefoot print. Huge, heavy, pressed so deep the edges had crumbled. Another step echoed far behind us, distant but unmistakably heavy. Mark whispered, "We need to go, Sheriff. We need more people, more lights. Hell, maybe the state police." "No," I said. "If we go back now, we won't find the kids alive." He didn't argue, but fear flashed across his face. We followed the tunnel until the air thinned, tasting of stagnant water and chemicals. Far ahead, my light caught something reflective, smooth surfaces embedded in the rough stone. We approached slowly. My stomach dropped. The tunnel wall wasn't stone anymore. It had been cut away, clean, precise, square, reinforced with steel plates, built, not mined, as if someone had carved a new facility inside the mountain long after the mine closed. Mark's voice shook. "This isn't a mine anymore. This is—" "I know." The concrete doorframe led into a narrow corridor lined with rusted pipes and flickering emergency lights, long dead but still carrying some ghost of their former glow. "Sheriff. What the hell were they doing down here?" I didn't know then. Not fully. But something in my bones told me we weren't just dealing with abandoned mining tunnels. We were standing at the threshold of something else. Something hidden. Something meant to stay buried. And behind us, deeper in the mine, a sound echoed again. Louder this time. A low, resonant exhale. Not human. Not an animal I'd ever heard. Something caught between a growl and a broken breath. Mark raised his gun. His hands shook. "Sheriff." "I know," I whispered. "It's close." And the way the air shifted, the way the cold deepened, I knew it wasn't alone. We stepped into the reinforced corridor. Somewhere behind us, something followed. And ahead, the truth waited in the dark. The corridor didn't belong in a mine. Not even close. Mines are chaotic by nature. Uneven floors, crooked beams, dust, and time eating everything. But this tunnel was straight as a ruler, its floor poured in concrete, its walls lined with rusted metal panels coated in flaking white paint. Every 20 feet, dead fluorescent fixtures hung like bones from the ceiling. Mark and I slowed instinctively. "This was built after the mine closed," he whispered. "Yes," I said softly. "Long after." The air had changed again. No more mineral cold. Now it smelled like old hospitals, bleach gone sour, metal soaked in humidity, and a faint chemical bitterness beneath everything. My flashlight beam revealed stains on the walls, drips of something brown, darker than rust, leading toward the depths. "Sheriff," Mark said, voice shaking. "What if this isn't a rescue mission anymore?" "Doesn't matter," I said. "We keep going. We find the kids." But a coldness in the pit of my stomach whispered otherwise. We followed the corridor until it split into 3 branching passageways, each marked by decayed signs in flaking stencil letters. Genetic storage, East Wing. Restricted access. Authorized personnel only. Experimental observation. Neither one of us spoke for several seconds. Mark swallowed. "This is military, isn't it?" "Not officially," I answered. "Not anymore." A draft of cold air brushed past us from the experimental corridor, carrying a faint, low hum, like an old generator barely clinging to life. I chose that direction. The hall narrowed again, the walls now covered in peeling hazard stickers. Biohazard? NO unauthorized entry. Level 4 clearance. But everything was abandoned. Or so it should have been. Our footsteps echoed strangely, like the hallway swallowed sound and regurgitated it seconds later, warped and distorted. About 50 feet in, we found the chamber. A blast door stood halfway open, bent outward from the inside, as if something behind it had hit it with enough force to rip steel like thin ice. The hinges were twisted, the metal torn, bite-like impressions denting the surface. Mark's voice wavered. That wasn't explosives. Something pushed this open. I forced my breath to stay steady. Inside was a room large enough to hold a small workshop. The ceiling dripped with condensation, and old fluorescent lights flickered sickly, their tubes half filled with stagnant water or chemical residue. The floor was littered with paperwork, hundreds of sheets soaked in moisture, stuck together like dead leaves. The walls were lined with broken glass tubes, pipes, and tanks connected to ancient machines humming with dying power. My light swept across a metal table. Chains hung from it, shackles, restraints, heavy enough for something far stronger than a human. On the far wall, a phrase was still readable beneath grime. Project Northwing, Phase 3. Mark's breath caught. Sheriff. What were they doing down here? I knelt, pulling a stack of soggy papers apart. Some pages disintegrated, but enough survived to read parts. Subject viability decreasing. DNA instability rising. Cross-specimen traits present. Aggression intermittent. Displays comprehension. Skeletal growth accelerating beyond projections. Terminate excess subjects before winter. One page had a photograph taped to it, blurry, taken from behind reinforced glass. Something stood in the frame, towering, broad, covered in patchy hair, hunched like it was trying to hide from the light. Not an ape, not human, something between. I felt my stomach turn to ice. Then Mark whispered, "Sheriff, you'd better see this." He pointed his flashlight at a large tank in the corner. The glass was shattered inward, shards scattered everywhere. Brown stains coated the inside. In the bottom of the tank lay a skeletal frame, no, not fully skeletal. Some ligaments still clung to bone. The skull was elongated, jaw heavy, eye sockets large, the teeth too human and too animal at the same time. But the worst part? Its arms. Long. Strangely long. Long enough to drag on the ground. Prototype. Failed one. I whispered the words I didn't want to believe. These weren't legends. These were experiments. Behind us, something thumped in the corridor. A heavy, slow footstep. Mark jerked around, flashlight raised. His beam landed on the open door. Silence. Then another step. Closer. Back, I whispered. Lights low. We crouched behind the metal table. Our lights dimmed. My heart hammered so loudly I was certain the creature, whatever it was, could hear it. Another step. And another. Then a long, dragging sound of fingers trailing along metal walls. The creature paused directly outside the chamber door. The air thickened. The temperature plummeted. I heard it breathing, deep, slow, and heavy. Not animal. Not quite human. It sniffed. I tightened my grip on my gun, knowing full well it wouldn't matter. For 5 endless seconds it stood there. Then the breathing shifted. A slow, rumbling exhale, almost like a sigh, but filled with pain. And then, it walked on. The sound of its steps receded into the corridors, one slow thud after another, until silence reclaimed the underground. We waited another full minute before moving. "I don't think it wants to kill us," Mark whispered. "No," I said, though my voice was hollow. "But we're in its territory." I stood up, shining my light over the remaining documents. Most were ruined. But in the corner, behind fallen pipes, a metal cabinet had survived. I forced it open. Inside were sealed binders wrapped in plastic. Faded labels read, Homo primatus hybrid program. Field deployment potential. Subject behavioral notes Northwing. And the thickest binder, Genesis report. I took it. Mark held up another object. A keycard, cracked but readable. Level 4 access. Personnel? H. Connolly. "Looks like we're going deeper," he said. I nodded grimly. We followed the corridor past 2 collapsed rooms until we reached a reinforced stairwell leading down. The walls bore deep gouges, claw marks, dragged downward, spaced inches apart, as if something with immense strength braced itself during ascent or descent. At the bottom was another blast door. It was not broken. It was open. The air wafting from it hit us like a physical force, stale, humid, carrying undertones of decay and chemical residue so strong it burned our eyes. My flashlight shook as I raised it. Beyond the door was a vast chamber. Cages lined the walls. Dozens of them. Some small, some enormous. All open. Most empty, except one. In the center of the room sat a pile of bones. Long, thick, cracked open. Human radius bones. Femurs. Ribs. But they were old. Dry. Dusty. Something had cleaned them to the marrow. Mark gagged. Jesus, these are minors. Maybe missing persons, maybe. Quiet. Because on the far side of the chamber something moved. Not fast. Slow. Pained. I heard a soft dragging, as if something immense was shifting its weight. Mark whispered, "We should leave." "We can't," I said. "The kids." Movement. A shadow rising behind the row of cages. Huge and hunched. Then another sound. Not a growl. A whimper. Soft. Almost broken. I raised my light higher. And that's when we saw it. A silhouette. Massive, misshapen, limping. Covered in matted hair. Shoulders twice the width of a man's. Arms impossibly long. Head bowed as if bearing a terrible weight. But its eyes were unmistakable. Human. Pained. Traumatized. Begging. Mark lowered his weapon. "Sheriff, dear God. It's not a monster." "No," I whispered. "It's a prisoner." The creature took a step toward us. Slow, hesitant. Raising one long arm not in aggression, but in recognition. Not of us. Of our presence. Of our humanity. Of what it once had been. My voice barely escaped my throat. "They didn't discover Bigfoot," I said. Mark shook. Not from fear, but from the horror of understanding. "They made it." The creature stared at us. And I swear, in that moment, it was asking for something. Help. Mercy. Release. Before either of us could speak, a metallic clang echoed from another nearby chamber. The creature's eyes widened. Mine did too. We weren't alone down here. Not anymore. The metallic clang echoed through the chamber like a blade drawn across steel, sharp enough to snap every nerve in my body tight. The creature, this towering, broken being, flinched at the sound, its massive shoulders hunching, its breath stuttering like a frightened animal cornered in its own home. Mark lifted his flashlight, but I grabbed his arm before he could sweep it across the shadows. "Easy," I whispered. "Don't startle it." The creature's eyes, God, those eyes, shifted from us to the dark corridor where the sound had come from. A low vibration rippled through the floor. Something else was moving. Something bigger, or more aggressive, or maybe just more desperate. The creature before us seemed to sense it, and for the first time since entering the chamber, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt sorrow. It stepped forward, limping heavily. Its right leg dragged, the knee swollen and twisted in a way that made my gut clench. The closer it came, the more detail my light revealed. Patches of fur ripped away, old scars crossing its chest like a map of suffering, and a long, healed incision running from its sternum down the stomach. Surgery, dissection, experimentation, and then the face. It was the kind of face a man should never have to see, half primate, half human, the features caught between species, as if nature itself had tried to heal a wound inflicted by human hands. Thick brow, flattened nose, jaw heavy, but the eyes were unmistakably human, and human eyes don't lie when they're pleading. It lifted one arm slightly, slowly, fingers curled inward, as if trying to show it posed no threat. The chain scars around its wrist glistened, white against dark hair. "It recognizes us," Mark whispered. "Sheriff, it's trying to communicate." "I know," I said, my voice cracking. Another clang erupted, closer this time. The creature turned sharply, letting out a deep, trembling grunt. Not a growl, not a warning, something like fear, like it was remembering something painful enough to make even its colossal body shiver. "Something's coming," Mark said. I nodded, but the creature didn't move toward us. It moved past us, Not hunting, not stalking, interposing, putting its massive frame between us and the dark corridor, as if it were trying to protect us. Before I could process that, a long, guttural howl reverberated through the concrete halls. Not the creature's voice. Higher, sharper, agonized, unstable. Like vocal cords not made for sound were trying to mimic one. Mark's face drained of color. There are more. Yes, I said softly. But not like him. The creature before us, this malformed, tortured being, looked back at me. Just a quick glance, but enough to freeze me in place. Its eyes were filled with such depth, such pain, such awareness, that a truth struck me deeper than any document or photograph had. This thing wasn't born from chaos. It wasn't some ancient legend lurking in the woods. It was a victim, a survivor, something the government built, broke, and buried. And now its past was coming for it. The creature grunted again, then made a low gesture, its fingers brushing the ground, then flicking outward. Go. Sheriff, Mark whispered. I think it's telling us to run. But I didn't move. Neither did he. Because from the corridor ahead, another silhouette emerged. Smaller than the creature protecting us, but faster, wilder. A malformed shape lurching on elongated limbs, its movements erratic, like a puppet jerked by tangled strings. Then another followed. And another. 3 creatures. Failed prototypes. Their bodies twisted in ways that defied nature. Spines warped, limbs uneven, eyes too small or too large, jaws unhinged. They moved like they were in pain simply by existing. The first one stepped into the chamber. When its eyes caught our light, they shrank back. But not in fear. More like frenzy. The creature standing with us, the one with human eyes, stepped forward and let out a low, deep rumble that seemed to vibrate the air. A warning. A plea. Command. The malformed ones didn't listen. They screeched, lunging forward with a sound that tore through the chamber like jagged metal ripping open a steel drum. And then everything happened at once. The creature protecting us stepped in front, slamming both fists into the concrete floor so hard the entire chamber shook. Dust rained from the ceiling. The malformed trio hesitated. Then they attacked anyway. The first prototype leaped, claws extended. The creature caught it mid-air, twisting its body with a sickening crack. The second lunged for its flank. The creature pivoted, pushing Mark and me backward with its free arm, as if shielding us from the incoming impact. The third one scrambled across the wall, scrambling on misshapen limbs like a spider. It sprang toward me. I fired. Not out of bravery, out of raw terror. The gunshot exploded in the chamber, the recoil slamming through my wrist. The bullet struck the creature in the shoulder. It shrieked, tumbling across the floor but quickly scrambling back up. Still alive, still charging. The main creature, the one with human eyes, roared. A deep, guttural sound filled with fury and anguish. It grabbed the spider-like prototype and hurled it across the room, straight into a cage where it crumpled in a twisted heap. Before the other 2 could react, the creature slammed them into the ground simultaneously, one under each arm, overwhelming them with sheer strength. The fight was brutal, violent, horrifying, but somehow heartbreakingly familiar. It wasn't fighting monsters. It was fighting its own brothers, failed versions of itself, creatures who never had a chance. Mark and I backed away slowly, watching as the final prototype gave a pained, broken whine before collapsing under the creature's grip. The chamber fell silent, except for the heavy, ragged breathing of the surviving creature. It knelt on the floor, shoulders heaving, the weight of what it had just done sinking into its massive frame. It touched one of the fallen creatures gently, almost reverently, and let out a low, mournful hum. A grief sound, a sound no legend had ever mentioned. My throat tightened. Sheriff, Mark whispered. He wasn't trying to hurt us. He was protecting us. He understood, I said. He understood everything. The creature rose slowly, limping, blood seeping from new wounds. It looked at us, not as prey, not as threats, but as living things sharing the same space, the same pain, the same terrible truth. It looked at me the longest, and in its eyes I saw something I still struggle to describe. Recognition, memory, humanity. Took one step toward us, slow, almost shy. Then another. My hand tightened on the flashlight, but not on my gun. "Easy," I whispered. "We're not your enemy." The creature blinked, slowly, deliberately. Then it did something that shattered me. It raised one hand, palm outward, the gesture clumsy but unmistakable. Not aggression, not dominance. A greeting, a human gesture. "Dear God," Mark whispered. "It's aware." I lifted my hand the same way. Our palms never touched, but in that cold, dead chamber, it felt like the closest thing to truth I'd ever experienced. Then the creature pointed deeper into the facility. Not toward escape, toward something else. Something it wanted us to see. Something it needed us to understand. It turned and limped into the dark hallway, without looking back. "Sheriff," Mark said softly, "are we following it?" "Yes," I said. "We are." Because by then, I realized the impossible. This creature wasn't the threat. It was the witness. And it was leading us to the heart of the secret Blackwash mine had been hiding for decades, where the final truth waited. The creature moved ahead of us, limping through the corridor like a wounded sentinel guiding intruders through sacred ground. Each step it took was heavy and deliberate, echoing through the abandoned facility in deep, uneven thuds. Its breath rasped softly, strained, pained, but it never slowed. Mark and I followed at a cautious distance, our flashlights trembling over walls scarred by claw marks and rusted warning signs. Every room we passed felt like a tomb. Bare metal bunks bolted to concrete. Scratched viewing windows smeared with the fading outline of bloody handprints. Broken restraints dangling like forgotten shackles. This place wasn't just a laboratory. It was a graveyard, and our guide a survivor. The deeper we went, the colder the air became. The smell thickened. Ammonia, old blood, decaying chemicals, and something faintly organic, like fur soaked in damp earth. Eventually, the corridor opened into a massive steel door, larger than any we'd seen. One hinge was broken, twisted outward as if something had forced its way in or out. The door itself sagged at an odd angle. The creature paused before it. Slowly, gently, it pressed one palm, enormous, scarred, trembling, against the metal. Its breath came out in a low, shuddering exhale. A sound not of fear, of memory, of mourning. I realized then, whatever was behind that door was the reason it brought us here. The reason it protected us. The reason it recognized us. "Sheriff," Mark whispered behind me. Do you feel that?" I did. A pressure in the air, like the whole mountain was holding itself still. "Stay close," I said. The creature stepped back and nodded. Another shockingly human gesture. Before limping inside, we followed. The room was enormous. A subterranean vault carved from natural stone and fortified with metal. My flashlight swept across shattered containment tanks, overturned medical carts, cracked observation glass. Thick cables lay coiled like dead snakes across the floor. But the center of the room was what made my legs go weak. A massive cylindrical tank, intact, sealed, towering from floor to ceiling. Frost coated the glass in white sheets. Vines of frozen residue crawled down its sides. A small red light blinked on the console beside it. The only sign of life left in the entire facility. What is this?" Mark whispered. I stepped closer. The frost thinned enough under my light to reveal something inside the tank. A shape, huge, still, floating. A body, covered in thick fur, lighter than the creature who led us here. Larger too, its silhouette nearly filled the chamber. The face was obscured by ice, but its arms drifted at its sides. Long, heavy, powerful. A second creature. Preserved. Waiting. The creature beside us approached the tank and pressed its palm against the glass, just as it had against the steel door. A low, mournful hum vibrated from its chest, one that softened into something heartbreakingly gentle. A sound of longing, of grief, of love. Mark's eyes widened. Sheriff, that's its mate, or its brother, its family. Yes, I whispered, because the truth was undeniable. The creature wasn't showing us a secret. It was showing us a loss. The documents we'd seen upstairs flashed through my mind. Terminate excess subjects, DNA instability, field deployment potential. But nowhere, not in any government file, would you find this, a creature mourning the last of its own kind. I touched the glass. It was freezing, my fingertips burning from the cold. But behind that frost, I saw its face. Just enough. Larger brow, calm expression, eyes closed peacefully. Dead, preserved, never meant to wake. The creature bowed its head. Then it turned to me, and in that moment, I understood the truth it had brought us here to see. They weren't monsters living in the woods. They were a species we engineered, then tortured, mutated, abandoned, and erased. And this one, the one standing before us, had survived every cruelty imaginable. Not to kill, but to mourn. A noise cut through the silence. Boots, radios, distant metallic clanging. Mark spun toward the corridor. Sheriff, someone's coming. The creature stiffened. Its ears, small, rounded, furry, twitched toward the sound. Not curiosity, recognition, fear. The government, I said quietly. They know we're here. Did the kids call for help? No. Then how? I didn't answer, because I knew. Deep down, I'd known since the moment I saw the sealed wing. This place hadn't been forgotten, just hidden, protected, monitored. And when those prototypes attacked, when those alarms silently tripped, when those doors opened, someone up top knew. The creature backed away from us slowly. Eyes moved between me and the tank, as if torn between staying with its dead family and protecting the two strangers who'd witnessed its truth. Then it made a sound, short, urgent, almost pleading. Go. Sheriff, Mark said. It's telling us to run again. But I shook my head. If we leave it here, they'll kill it. The creature took one more step back, shaking its head, however slightly, and repeated the sound. Go. Mark grabbed my arm. If we stay, we die. Or worse. Come on. Voices echoed from the corridor. Flashlights flickered against the walls. Military cadence. Controlled. Tactical. They were already close. The creature looked at me one last time. And I swear, on everything I have left, it smiled. Not with its lips. With its eyes. A soft, resigned expression. A thank you. A goodbye. Then it turned toward a gap in the stone wall. A narrow fissure we never noticed. And slipped into it with surprising speed, vanishing into darkness. Gone. Just like that. When the first soldiers burst into the chamber, shouting orders and aiming rifles, Mark and I raised our hands. They surrounded us, dragged us out, separated us, took our radios, our flashlights, our weapons. They never asked what we saw. They already knew. The entire facility was sealed within hours. Explosives planted. Concrete poured. The mine dynamited shut. Our statements scrubbed. Our memories corrected in official reports. The teenagers were found near the entrance, dazed and terrified, with no memory of what chased them. Their trails never even reached the lower levels. There was no paperwork, no evidence, no mention of the creature, not a single trace, except the one burned into my mind. And now, 30 years later, I'm telling the truth for the first time, not because justice will be done, not because anyone will believe me, but because silence has a way of eating a man alive, and because I know in the deepest part of my soul that the creature survived. I feel it in the woods sometimes, on cold nights, when the fog sinks low and the mountains hold their breath. Footsteps that stop when I turn. A shadow moving between the pines. Watching, waiting, not hunting, just remembering. And I believe this. It does not hate us. It does not seek revenge. It does not want blood. It wants only what we took from it. A life, family, place to belong. So I leave you with this. If Bigfoot is still out there, it's not because nature made him. It's because we did. and God help us for what we've done. Asterisk asterisk.